I do think it's okay to ask people for things in a first email, and I have another email template for that called How to Ask a Favor from a Big Shop, by which I mean how to ask someone for something when they have more to offer you than you have to offer them. But in general, you want to build relationships, and it's exactly the same with sales, right? Like, you don't want to walk up to someone and be like, buy my stuff. No, you've never heard of me, but I'm amazing. But if you build a relationship with them, my sales coach, Kendrick, who's from the Deep South, always likes to say, all things being equal, friends buy from friends. All things being unequal, friends buy from friends.
Hey hatchlings, welcome to the Motion Hatch podcast. I'm your host, Hayley Akins. Hey hatchlings, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode. This is a podcast where we speak about the business side of motion design and animation. On this week's show, I spoke to Marsha from yesmarsha.com. Now, she is a networking mentor and storytelling coach. I brought her on the show because I wanted to talk to her all about networking and how we can use that in our businesses. I also talked to her a bit about storytelling as well and how we can use that in our businesses as motion designers. And she's created a great secret webpage just for us. You can see that at yesmarsha.com/motionhatch, where she's given us loads of email templates on how to reach out to clients and how to do follow-up emails after you meet someone at a conference and things like that. So this is packed full of great tips and insights about networking and just generally making industry friends. So here we go. Hey Marsha, thank you so much for coming on the show.
I'm stoked to come on. I feel like I now know so much about the inner workings of Motion Hatch. I can't believe I'm actually here.
Yeah, that's so cool. Do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
I am a networking mentor, which is a title I made up, and a storytelling coach. When I started teaching networking, I don't mind the word coach now, but I didn't like it then. So I just kind of found a list of words and picked a different one. But what that means is I help people tell personal stories so that they can use them in talks and in their business. And I also help people who think that they hate networking and who think that it makes them want to throw up and or cry, learn how to do it in a way that actually feels good, and then helps them like grow their career or business without having to do any brown nosing at all, and just by like being a nice normal person.
Yeah, that's what the kind of networking that everyone wants to do.
Yeah. And I don't like calling it networking. I like calling it making industry friends. Like, rather than going into a room and being like, I've got a network, you got to go into a room and be like, who would I be friends with here, irrespective of their job? Or like, if they have a certain job, how do I have a friendshipy conversation with them? And part of the reason I know how to do this is because my previous career was that I was a radio DJ, and I also chose music for TV shows and films, which, you're in the UK, so I can't remember if I've ever told you this, but you will have heard of some of them. So I chose all the music for The In-Betweeners. I worked on a show called Friday Night Dinner, worked on the first 2 seasons of Made in Chelsea, which... say what you like about it, the music is amazing. And so suddenly, first of all, I got jobs that were like very highly sought after. And then I also suddenly was the person getting 300 emails a day. And so I started to figure out what got through and what didn't get through and why.
Yeah, that makes sense. I love Friday Night Dinner.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Awesome. Not everyone knows it. It's a lovely little show.
Yeah, it's great. Some people will be listening to this like, what are they talking about? But if you're in the UK, you can check it out. I don't know about in the US, but yeah. So I wanted to talk a bit about networking first and then go on to talk a bit about storytelling and how that can help us in our businesses. So obviously most people are super scared to talk to people in a real life situation, and such as like going to a conference and things like that. What are your kind of like top tips for networking at events?
My number one tip is like, stop thinking about it as networking. And so I should say, I used to be terrified. When I run workshops, I tell this story about the first conference I ever went to, which was this conference for people who wanted to figure out whether or not they wanted to study psychology at university. And it was at Loughborough University, and I didn't know anyone. And it was like an overnight thing. And on the night, all of these 17-year-olds had this massive party in the corridor. And I sat listening to it from inside my room, where I was like sitting on the empty bed with stomach pains because I'd been too scared to go to dinner, because the idea of walking up to a bunch of people and going, hi, I don't have any friends, can I sit with you, was so terrifying that I just didn't go to any of the meals. and then my second conference was the Radio Academy Festival, and there was all these like bigwigs, and I was again terrified and spent most of the 3 days hiding in the washrooms, like hiding in the toilets, wanting to cry or throw up. And it's because I thought, and this is why I think lots of people are scared of networking, because they think that this is what networking is. Walking up to the most important person in the room and going, "Hi, I'm amazing. You're amazing. Let's be amazing together and I will make something amazing." And like, that's awful for most people. And actually what I realized it actually is talking to people that you like about stuff that you're both interested in. But the crucial things are you have to talk to people who aren't just your friends. You have to follow up over email, and you have to add value long before you ask for anything. And those last two things are also how you can like do networking with people you've never met before on the internet. And again, it's just all about, like, I feel like all of networking happens over email. So if you are someone who is really introverted, like if you're someone who doesn't like walking up to strangers and starting conversations, that's awesome news, because you can actually get away with never doing that or very rarely doing that.
There's so much information there. But in terms of like the conference thing, right? Say that I'm going to a conference and I'm like the person who's like, "Oh my God, I hate talking to people. I don't want to go up and be like, oh, hey guys," because you always feel like you're like the uncoolest person in the room. And then should you like kind of try and reach out to people beforehand? I guess I've heard this before, like on people have done it on LinkedIn and stuff where they're like, "Hey, we're both going to this conference," like blah, 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 blah. Or like some conferences have Facebook groups and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think 100%. If you're super nervous, if you spend half an hour, spend 5 minutes researching 6 people, that's 30 minutes of your time. And then all you do is you just like spend 4 minutes researching them and then 1 minute writing an email being like, "Hey, I see you're going to the such and such conference. The work you're doing with whatever they're doing looks really interesting. I'd love to try and find you to talk about it at the weekend." What you're doing then is, first of all, you're not making like a definite plan that they can knock you back on. Secondly, you're saying try, which means that either if you don't find them, it's no shame ups, or if you turn up and you're like, "They are terrible," then you don't have to feel bad that you didn't find them. But it gives you an excuse to walk up to 5 different people. And even if they didn't reply, be like, "Hey, I don't know if you saw, but I sent you an email, I'm blah, blah." And they'll be like, "Oh, cool." And here's the other thing is, I guarantee you, if you're feeling terrified, most other people are feeling terrified as well. For sure, number one, like research and email a few people. That really helps. Even if you can't get a list of who's there, like email the speakers. And if you can go up to a speaker, often the speakers are really nervous. If you want to approach one of the speakers, try and do it before they go on stage. Not like just before they go on stage, because that'd be annoying. But like if they're on in the afternoon, try and find them in the morning, because after they go on stage, they suddenly become a celebrity. They're like an A-list celebrity in that room. And everyone will want to talk to them. But before they go on stage, they're not. And again, just spend like 5-10 minutes doing research. So I made a secret web page for this exact podcast, which is yesyesmarsha.com/motion hatch. And on there, I have a PDF of how to research people, like if you want to get super intense about it. And I lovingly refer to it as my How to Lightly Stalk People PDF. But if you just research them, then you'll have an excuse to go and talk to the speakers, or you'll have a thing to talk to other people about. So rather than desperately making conversation, you can be like, "Oh, hey, I heard that speaker Hayley Akins does this amazing podcast called Motion Hatch. Have you ever listened to it?" Or like, "What podcast do you want to listen to?" And it gives you like a thing to say to someone. Or like research the venue or the event or, the area. Be like, "Oh, I heard there's a really great ghost tour 2 doors down rather. Have you ever been on a ghost tour?" Like it gives you something to say when you're talking to people. Because I think that's the big terror, is that we're just not going to have anything to say. Or that we're just going to walk up to them and be like, "Hi, so what do you do?" Which is like the question that everybody hates answering.
What I feel like my problem is at events is like I kind of go up to people and then I just go like, "Oh, no, no," and like kind of like say loads of stuff, and then I'm like, "Oh my God, I should probably like ask some questions and things like that." But it's really hard to know what to ask people, and you don't want to be like, well, especially if you're meeting other motion designers, you can't really just be like, "What do you do?" Because you're like, "I'm a motion designer." You're a motion designer. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of obvious, but like, are there any other tips on like how to make it less awkward, I guess, when meeting people, especially people that you admire and stuff like that? Because I think I'm like really bad on the verbal diarrhea when it comes to that kind of thing.
Yeah, 100%. On the secret webpage, there's a video which I'm going to add in there by the time anyone listens to this, which is all about your dork goblin, D-O-R-K. And your dork goblin is the spirit that comes down and possesses you when you're trying to talk to someone you want to really impress and makes you act the opposite of all of those ways. So my dork goblin is really spitty and she like knocks things over with her hands. She's really, I call her an 8-year-old girl, I call her Cynthia, and she's like spitty and she knocks things over. And if the person I'm talking to makes a joke, I'm like, and it's awful. And I see it happening and I'm like, stop. But like, number one thing is awareness. So you kind of, and awareness and then like loving your dork goblin and being like, thank you. I totally see you're trying to help me. I'm okay. I've got this. So I made a whole video on dork goblins. Read through the comments. It's very funny to see all the different people who their dork goblins are. But it's really about asking questions as much as possible. And if you don't have anything to say, this is perfect because you carry the conversation. You're doing all the hard work, but you don't really have to say anything. And I think asking questions, I know lots of people who are like, oh, I hate small talk. And I'm always like, oh, do you also hate being in queues? Like everybody hates small talk. It's such a, people are like, oh, I don't network because I don't like small talk. And it's like, yeah, nobody likes small talk. I think you need at least one small talk question just to show that you have good boundaries and good judgment. I think if somebody walks up to you and is like, so what was the worst date you've ever been on? You'd be like, whoa, I've never met you before. And so I think it's fine to have a question like, oh, have you been to this event before? Or what do you think of this venue? Or have you seen that speaker before? Or something like that. And then a question I really like that I feel like you can get into after a couple of questions is like, how's your week been? How's your day been? Where did you come in from is kind of an obvious one. And then just be like, oh, like, how's your week been? Or like, did you do anything you liked this weekend? Because you get a pretty good idea of what they do without having to ask the question, what do you do? And I have some tips on how to answer that question, but I don't suggest asking it because I just think it's such a boring question to ask. But also you're kind of more likely to hit on those common touch points of things that you have in common that aren't necessarily work related. And the reason why you want to do that is because you don't want to network with people. Like when you're networking with people, it's because you want to make friends in the industry where you might be able to help each other out. And it's not just one way. You're not just finding people who can help you. Like you're also finding people that you can help so you don't feel bad about them helping you. And you don't want to help people who you think are like, I don't want to swear, but like idiots. You don't want to help people that you think are just like not very nice people or people that you object to. And so you want to find people that you would actually want to be friends with and asking, and especially saying what was something you enjoyed this weekend. How was your week? Or like, how was your day? Or what was something you did that you enjoyed? People love talking about stuff they're passionate about, and that makes them feel good. And we tend to remember how we felt and not, how people made us feel and not what they said or did. But also that's how you can find those friendshipy connections, because it might be like, oh my gosh, like you play tennis and I play tennis, or like you went to a dog fancy dress party and I love dogs in costumes as well. And then it's just like a nicer conversation and then you have more stuff to ask them about. But I think generally like showing an interest in people and getting them talking about something that they're passionate about is really the key. And it's totally fine to have a few pre-prepared questions. And the other thing I do is like, don't be afraid to fake your own self-confidence. I used to be painfully shy, as that story I told you earlier illustrates. Like I used to be painfully shy. Once you started talking to me, once you got to know me, you couldn't shut me up. But in terms of starting conversations, I'd go out with my friends and we'd meet people and they'd be like, oh, your friend Marsha's so quiet. And I'd be like, no, I'm not. I just don't know how to talk to you because you're new. And even now when I go to conferences, when I'm speaking, I'm totally comfortable. When I'm not speaking, I hate everybody the first morning. I went to one Michael Port's Heroic Public Speaking Live, whenever it was, last September or the year before, and it was the first time I'd been and I wasn't speaking. And I just sat in the room and I was so angry with this guy next to me because his trousers were like a bit too short. I was so mad at him for having short trousers. And it's just, I think it's this British thing where I'm like, I'm going to hate everyone because then if they judge me and find me not good enough, it doesn't matter because I already hate you. And actually what softens is once I start talking to people and asking them, about things they enjoyed, or asking them to tell me stories. And then you're like, oh, you're not perfect either. That's okay. Like you were saying earlier, you think everyone's so much cooler than you. And then you start talking to people and you're like, oh, you're not cool. That's awesome. I'm not cool either. Let's be, uncool together. So I think it's a lot about pretending that you're comfortable when you're not, and then that will happen. People will always follow your physical cues, and that's what they will, if you saw me at the beginning of a conference, you'd be like, wow, look at that girl. She's just like walking up to people and chatting to them. But in my head, I'm like, oh God, they're going to think I'm so sad. They're going to think I don't have any friends. Oh God, why did I wear this dress? What was I thinking? Like that's what's happening in my head, but I just pretend it's not. and then nobody notices, and then people respond to me as if I am comfortable. That makes them comfortable, and then that makes me comfortable.
I think that's an important point, is like you're kind of making other people feel more comfortable because you feel comfortable, and like everyone else really feels like the same anyway. Like it's not like everybody hates networking, and it's such a nice thing to like call it just like making friends in the industry. I like that kind of thing. I think that's really nice because that's what it should be like. I kind of wanted to ask you about two things. One about like adding value to like people that you meet, like how you can do that. And then the other one is, when you meet someone, maybe like they are speaking or something like that, and you know everything about them and they don't know who you are. Like, I don't know, like how you break that barrier down without just saying the same thing as everyone else, like, oh hey, yeah, I really like your stuff, I loved your talk, blah blah blah.
You mean like a person that you want, like a speaker or something?
Yeah, like a speaker or someone who's like influential in the industry.
Yeah. So first of all, do not assume that they always have a million people telling them how much they love their stuff. People tend to assume that, and people tend to just be really cool. And I feel like I've had this experience sometimes, and then I've seen it with other people when I'm with someone and they're just like, yeah, cool, yeah. And I'm like, shut up, like, you love this person. And there's a conference that I speak at every year, Jeff Goins' conference, and he now has me come and speak every day, every year at his conference. I'm on for 10 minutes a day. It's so fun. And the reason I made friends with him was I saw him speak at a conference, and I went up to him and talked to him afterwards. Again, like a human, there was something in his talk. He told this little story about when he was a kid, and I was like, oh, the same thing happened to me. And then I went through my emails before this conference because I was like, I'm going to talk on stage about how I ended up here. And I would send him 3 emails a year. So this is where the adding value thing comes in. So he has a podcast. Jeff Goins has this amazing podcast called The Portfolio Life. And that's about being a creative and doing lots of different things. And I'm just stalling suddenly. I'm like, oh no, is it bad form to recommend a podcast on another podcast? But I think it's good. It lifts us all up. Anyway, so
I love podcasts. Okay. Tell us more about more podcasts.
So I really loved his podcast, and I would send him like literally 2 or 3 emails a year. So one every few months. And then this would be the adding value thing. So I would never ask for anything. So there was one where he was talking about this book Flow, and it's by a guy called Chick Sent Me Hi. But he was kind of trying to figure out how to pronounce his name because it's really weird. And so I wrote to him and said, oh, when I was in school, when I was studying psychology, our teacher taught us, and he had I drew this little diagram that our teacher had taught us of a chick kicking someone up the bum and then them flying in the air, and it's like, Chick sent me hi. Yee! And so I was like, that always helps me remember it. And then I really liked this specific thing that you did, and then one more, and that was it. Something like that. And I would always say the 4 most beautiful words in the English language to a busy person, which are no need to reply. And then I ran into him at a conference and we started chatting, and then he added me on Facebook, and then we would like comment on each other's things on Facebook. And then he asked me to come speak at his conference. And actually, can I tell you a funny story about that? I'd seen his conference had popped up, and it had loads of people I really wanted to see speak, like Asher Dornfest and Michael Port was speaking. And I was like, oh, I really want to go to that, but I can't really justify it because I'm going to a bunch of other conferences and I don't have any friends in Nashville that I, need to go see. And then he sent me a message saying, do you do speaking? And I was like, oh my gosh, is Jeff Goins asking me to speak at his conference? So, and this was like when I kind of knew him a bit. We'd like, now we're friends, but at the time we'd like just run into each other from time to time. So I was like, oh yeah. And I like mentioned a couple of his friends' conferences that I'd spoken at. And then he said, do you want to come to my conference? But I was like, is he asking me to speak or is he asking me to buy a ticket? Because like, I'll buy a ticket. And so I didn't really know how to respond. So I decided to respond with a joke. And I wrote back and said, well, the only thing I have on my calendar that weekend is check boobs, so I'm probably okay. And then I had like 50 heart attacks. And he like took a bit of a long time to respond. And I was like, oh no. And I wrote anything like, just kidding. Like, oh, like, maybe that's just a joke that women of a certain age find funny. And then I was like, yeah, I'm totally free that weekend. And then he wrote back and said, please come and speak at my conference. And I was like, okay, phew. That was a risky joke, but it paid off. So with him, first of all, I'm emailing him 3 times a year. Like, that's not a very big investment. And secondly, the ways to add value. Sometimes it might be like, this person is verbally like, oh, I don't know how to do this. And then you can tell them. Be careful of offering unsolicited advice. Sometimes it's annoying. Sometimes you can get away with it. But the other thing is just thanks or praise. Actually, the very first email I ever sent him after we'd met and we chatted, but was me saying, hey, I don't know if you remember me. I came up to you and this is what we talked about. And I said, your talk was really helpful. He was talking about writing a manifesto. And I said, honestly, when you said it, I thought, I don't know what I stand for. But then suddenly I started writing out all of this stuff. And I sent him a picture of me holding up the writing I'd done, which was partly, and I sent it on Dropbox because you never send an unsolicited attachment, and because otherwise it might go in their spam. And I did that partly to be like proof that I'm telling the truth, but also to be like, remember my face. This is my face. Remember it. And then I said, and I've just ordered your book. I'm so excited to read it. And he wrote back and went, thank you so much. It means the world to me. And I was like, the world. And I've talked to him about this before, that you think that these people who you think are big heroes of you get like a giant mailbox full of fan mail every day, and they just don't, because people are lazy, and also because we don't tend to thank people very often in our culture. There's someone, I don't know if you know this chef called Jack Monroe, they used to have a column in The Observer, I think. And anyway, they've written all these amazing cookbooks. And I wrote to them a few years ago because I really like writing thank you cards. And their whole thing was like feeding their kid when they had no money. And I thought they probably get 20 letters a day from, single parents saying, oh my God, my child was about to starve to death and then you rescued us. And I basically was like, oh, I wasn't very good at cooking. And then I read your cookbook and now I'm a bit better. But I was like, oh, sorry, I'll send it anyway. And I didn't put my email address or my address or anything, but I just wrote Marsha in snowy Toronto. And then somebody tagged me on Instagram because they'd taken a photo of the card and said, dear Marsha in snowy Toronto, I just cried reading your card and now it's up on my mantelpiece. And that was like probably 3 or 4 years ago. And the other day I commented on something on their Instagram and they wrote, Marsha, your card is framed in my office. And this is someone who was like, gets paparazzi, like that's how famous they are. And, I wrote this card where I didn't really say much, and it was like a card that cost me $3, but written thank you cards, just saying to someone the thing you did. I really believe that all anybody wants in life is, 1, to feel truly seen and heard and understood and to feel like they belong, and 2, to feel like they've been of service, to feel like they left the world better off than they found it. So just by saying to someone, you did a thing that helped me, is enormous, especially if you then say, here is what I did differently as a result. It's enormous. So that's a really simple way to add value to someone. And actually, one of the things on your yesyesmarsha.com/motion hatch secret webpage is I have a bunch of email templates on there. And there's one called the Thursday Thank You, which is a thing I used to do on my Facebook page when I was just teaching networking, where I would say, like, write an email to someone. So it's an email template for writing to someone to thank them for something. So if you don't know what you would say, just use that. And same when you're going up to this person at the conference, don't go up and ask them a question you could Google. You don't have to go up and be like, oh my God, everything you do is amazing. You're incandescent. Like, you can just go up and say, hey, you wrote a blog post about this thing and it really helped me. Thanks. And that will mean so much to them, so much. My friend met Liz Gilbert the other day, who's like one of the most famous people in the whole world. And this friend is like quite introverted. And she just went and said, thanks, your books like have meant so much to me and it really helped me. And she said Liz Gilbert hugged her for like a solid 2 minutes.
That's awesome.
So awesome.
Yeah. I'm reading her book at the moment, Big Magic. It's really
she
good.
Is.
Well,
yeah.
Listen to it.
She's awesome. Yeah. But just think about how many people, like, she has obsessive fans. There's literally Eat, Pray, Love tours in Italy and Bali and, and that's how many fans she has. And she still hugged my friend for 2 minutes. And, my friend told me what she said and it was really nice, but it wasn't like earth-shatteringly, tear-inducing. It wasn't like a poem. And so just saying to someone, thank you, you helped me in this way, is enormous and so powerful.
I like the idea of sending people snail mail as well.
Oh my God.
Because that's more exciting. It's like, oh my God, something in the mail.
People lose their ish when you send them something in the mail. I'm pitching a book at the moment, and I went into one of the publishers who's interested, and the boss of that section of the publishing company poked their head in, and we had a little chat. And then afterwards I sent a thank you card. And then I found out the other day that the lady I was speaking to was like, oh yeah, my agent had said, oh yeah, she and her boss were chatting about it. And I was like, I bet it's because I keep sending them cards. And then they remember, and then the card sits on their desk, and then they remember you forever. And if you don't know where the address is, like most people who have mailing lists legally have to put an address at the bottom of their mailing list, or just find out their company address and send it to them.
Yeah, that's true. And also sometimes in privacy policies, that's where I've digged addresses out of before.
Privacy policies, that is genius.
I know, because you have to put an address on there as well. So it's a similar thing to the email list.
That's so smart. Go. So smart. So smart.
When was the last time a client paid you late, or you wanted to charge for project files but didn't know how? Most of the issues we face in our businesses as motion designers can be solved with good communication. The best way to communicate your terms upfront to the client and ensure your project runs smoothly is to have a solid contract in place. In talking to motion designers, I know that most are either not using a contract at all or have cobbled together one from various online sources. I get it. Lawyers can be expensive and you just want to get on with what you do best, which is making great work. That's exactly why I created the Freelance Contract Bundle. Designed in collaboration with lawyers from both the UK and the US, the Freelance Contract Bundle is a set of downloadable contract templates made specially for motion designers and animators. It includes a commission contract and a freelance terms of service contract, helping you create smoother relationships both direct to client and also while working with agencies and studios. To find out how the Freelance Contract Bundle can help protect your business, your work, and ensure your projects run smoothly, go to motionhatch.com/contract. Now let's get back to the episode. Say if you meet someone at like a conference and you really admire them, and like, say it's like an animation studio or something like that, and they did a talk, and then you kind of want to be like following up with them on email and be like, hey, we met. That was awesome. Like, but like, how can you like get them to be your clients in that sense?
Well, first of all, for following up, I have an email template for that. One of your other email templates is literally a nice to meet you email template. And if you have a lot of time and energy, you want to do that for every single person that you meet that you didn't think was awful. More realistically, you're just going to do it for a handful of people. And again, ideally, you're going to do this within the first 72 hours. In real life, there are a lot of episodes of Orange is the New Black and This Is Us that you have to catch up on. And you've got to make dinner, and then you've got some deadlines. I have written to people like 6 months and a year after I've met them, but part of the email template is putting yourself in context. And it's like, either you're going to email them and they're going to be like, oh, why did you wait a year? Who are you? And they're not going to email you back or care about you. Or you're not going to email them and they're not going to email you back and or care about you. So you're not any worse off. And the reason you want to do that like as soon as possible is because you want to show people that you emailed them before you wanted anything from them. So that then, you know, say in 2 years' time, suddenly it'd be really useful for you if they could put in a good word for you. You can do it as a reply all to that first email, even if they never responded. And that does two things. First of all, they get to see that you reached out before you wanted anything. And secondly, people will always invest more time in someone they've already invested time in. So I've had this happen before, especially when I was choosing music for TV shows, I was getting like 200-300 emails a day from bands. I literally didn't have time to email all of these people back. But sometimes I might see a re in the subject line and see that it was a chain, or see that it was a chain. And I'd look back and I'd see that they had emailed me 6 months or 2 years before. I would have zero memory of this. But on some level, I'm thinking, well, past Marsha could be bothered to write back to them. So I guess present Marsha's going to as well. You know, we don't always remember everyone, but we remember if they were awful. And so we're like, well, if past me thought that this person was all right, then I guess they're all right. And it just saves you a bit of time. I do think it's okay to ask people for things in a first email, and I have another email template for that called How to Ask a Favor from a Big Shot, by which I mean how to ask someone for something when they have more to offer you than you have to offer them. But in general, you want to build relationships, and it's exactly the same with sales, right? Like, you don't want to walk up to someone and be like, buy my stuff. No, you've never heard of me, but I'm amazing. But if you build a relationship with them, my sales coach, Kendrick, who's from the Deep South, always likes to say, all things being equal, friends buy from friends. All things being unequal, friends buy from friends. sense. And it's true, right? Like you'd rather buy something from like a friend of a friend than you would from some total random. And so it's about building those relationships with them and adding value. And the thing about the adding value stuff, Jeff Coynes probably replied to like 1 out of every 4 or 5 of those emails that I sent over a couple of years. You know, people send me emails all the time and I'm like, oh, that's so nice. I am going to get back to that. And then, you know, the episodes of TV and the dinner. But it's just nice to see them. You're just kind of, I feel like it's like walking up to their door, putting a little present on the doorstep, ringing the doorbell and then running away. Like that's what you're doing when you send a little value add. So it says to them, like, this is a person that I want to have in my network. It builds that relationship. And also as humans, we're wired to reciprocate. Like, have you ever had where you go for coffee with someone that you don't know that well and then they pay for the coffee or they pay for your drink and then you're like, right? It makes you feel all like, oh, now I owe them one. And that's because as humans, we're wired to reciprocate. And so by adding value, you're building up that sense of reciprocation. And also it's just, you know, makes sense. Like, who are you more likely to lend a tenner to? The person who always borrows a tenner from you or the person who always lends you one?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I think like probably what everyone like is wondering is like, how do we apply this stuff where normally what we would do is we would like find loads of like animation studios and loads of people that we want to work with. And then we're like digging around for like some sort of email and maybe we only get like the info at email. And how do you kind of connect with people on a personal way? And how can we kind of get away from this just cold emailing kind of thing and use some of the things that you're talking about? I guess it's down to like research and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I think research, always the first place is look to your network, you know, friends, buy from friends. Like always just go on Facebook and be like, does anyone know anyone who works at this place? Or go on LinkedIn and see if you have any people in common that you know well enough to message. And again, don't be afraid to ask people for favors. Another email template on there. And this, by the way, you can just go on that page and they're just there. You don't have to sign up to my list or anything to get them, but is how to get a favor from a long lost colleague, like someone that you haven't spoken to for 10 years. I had a thing recently where somebody who once did me a huge favor, she was the first person who ever hired me in my business to run a full day workshop, even though I'd never run a workshop in my life before. God love her. And she had emailed and she was applying for a job at a big record label. And I told her to tell me the name of the person who was hiring her. And then I just went on LinkedIn, saw who I had in common. And it was this guy who, like, honestly, I had to search my email to be like, who is he again? And then I remembered he was a rep for one of the record labels. And I literally hadn't spoken to him in 7 years, but I was like, nothing to lose. And he now since had become something high up in the label. So I sent him an email. And weirdly, the last thing we'd done together was I did an interview with Tom Jones that he was repping, and, which was amazing. And because I used to be a radio DJ. And so that was like one of the last things I did as my job there. And so I emailed him and was like, hey, you know, I haven't seen you for ages. I like looked up on Facebook to see what he'd been up to. You know, I think the last time we spoke was when I did that Tom Jones thing. I just saw on Facebook that you've been up to XYZ. That looks so fun. And then really got to the point, you know, can I ask a favor? Somebody who I think is amazing is applying for a job at your thing. This is the person they need to speak to. Is there any chance I could ask you to put in a good word? You know, this person is like reliable, cheerful, hardworking, all of that. And then email I got back was like, oh my gosh, so great to hear from you. Love seeing you on Facebook. I just got off the phone from my boss and I've told her all about how this person is great. And like, that was so nice. And I didn't feel like I was like, listen, do this, or you know what I mean? I wasn't like, you better do me a favor. I just was being nice and normal and going into it with no expectations and being really clear. This is another thing you'll find on all my email templates. So like, if you're going to ask for something, be crystal clear about A, what you're asking for, and B, what the exact next step you want them to take is. And, you know, is it hit reply to you? Is it click on a link? Is it call this person? Is it look at your website? Ask what the exact next step is. And, yeah, and then people love, as I said, people like being of service. People like helping each other out. So first of all, go to your friends and see if you know anyone that knows them. And then if you don't, call them up and say, you know, who's in charge of such and such department? Can you tell me the name of the person who's in charge of such and such department? And then they'll almost certainly tell you. And then you can say, okay, and so am I right that their email address would be firstname.lastname@company.com? And they might say, oh, actually, it's firstname@company.com. They're not going to be like, that's private information. And if it is private information, then like, that's not the company you're going to necessarily work at next. That's cool. You just keep asking, keep meeting people, keep going to more events to then ask people and get your 6 degrees of separation. And then the next thing is like building that relationship. You can just pitch them straight off, but if you can build a relationship first, then do like follow them on social media. Oh my gosh, comment on their blogs if they have blogs. Before I had a blog, I thought the only people who commented on blogs were losers who had nothing better to do with their time. And then I got a blog and people didn't write comments and it like made my heart cry. And then people did write comments and it made my heart sing. Like people love when you comment on their blogs. So comment on their blogs, be in their world, or if they don't have any blogs or social media or anything, then just send an email saying, hey, I just want to say that I really like the work that you're doing. Even if you're pitching them, the other thing is like, show them that you're pitching just them. Don't send a form letter. When I worked at a radio station called XFM, and like the big BBC station was Radio 1, but there was ways in which Radio 1 was our competition because we played a lot of similar music. And sometimes I'd get emails from people being like, I listen to Radio 1 all the time and I'd love to work in radio. Can I come in and do your work experience at XFM? And I'd be like, no, because you don't want to work here. Write to Radio 1 and be their work experience instead. Or people would write to me like, Dear Alex, and I'd be like, that's not even my name. And so you can write a very similar email to everyone, but change the first paragraph and tell them specifically why you want to work where they are, and not just like, oh, because you pay really well. Say, well, like, what is it about the work that they do that is exciting to you? And then you can say why you think you'd be a good fit. And you don't have to be like, a ding dong about it. You can just be like, I have skills in XYZ that I feel, could be valuable to your team. If you want to take a look, then go here. But it's not you being like, listen, hire me or else. It's just you being like, hey, take a look. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't.
Yeah. So do you think that we should be like putting more time into, say, like going on social media, like if we like an animation studio, and then like liking their stuff before we like reach out to them? I've never heard of anyone ever ringing a company up in my industry and saying, hey, like, who is the booking person for the freelancers? Like, I'm like, that's amazing that no one's thought of this before. Like, they're not going to be like, shut up, go away.
Yeah, exactly.
Like most of the time they're like looking
you
for
said
people
the F
to work
word.
there.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, totally go on Facebook. I mean, think about what they want. Like they probably want you to share their stuff. Don't just click retweet because no one pays attention to that, or even share on Facebook. No one pays attention, but they pay attention when you tag them. That's what gives us the little dopamine hit. So share things and tag them and talk about why it's important to you, or talk about why you think that this thing is great. So for example, I shared something today, and honestly, I just shared it because I love it. And it's someone who happens to be a friend of mine, but I shared it because I think that she's brilliant. And she's a copy editor. And I shared it and I said, read this, partly because it's brilliant, partly because she writes sales emails like no one else I know. And her sales emails are like enjoyable whether or not you're going to buy her stuff. And so it's a masterclass in how to do that. So that's like a bit more meaningful than just like, check out Laura's new blog, smiley face, which the person I'm talking about, by the way, is Laura Belgray from Talking Shrimp. If you are interested in knowing that, just like add value to them. Think about what they want. If you think that they want their stuff shared, then share it, but put a little comment on why you think it's interesting. If they're asking a question, answer the question.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I just wanted to kind of go on to talk a bit about storytelling, because I know that you're awesome at that as well. And obviously, as motion designers, we tell a lot of stories through our work, and we tell other people's stories, like about their brands and things like that. But how can we use storytelling in our businesses to like attract more clients that we love working with?
Tell me this, do you feel like most of the motion designers that you know, will they have their own websites, like their own blogs and things? Okay. So I feel like that's the perfect way to do it. So again, if you think about the Freelance Bar from Freelance thing, stories is often a way that we get to know people, and we get to know if they're our kind of people or not, right? Like I feel like we've all had that experience if someone is telling a story at a party or an event, and it's just like, it's so well told, and they're hitting every single beat, and you're like, the story is such a well told story. I never want to be friends with you. And similarly, like we've all been to an event where you're standing around awkwardly and then somebody tells a story and you're like, I love you, new best friend. So the stories that we tell often say a lot about who we are. And remember, with storytelling, it's less about narrative and more about creating little action scenes. So like if I told that story of that first conference that I went to, and I usually tell it by saying, I'm sitting in this room listening to the shouts of 400 teenagers outside my door with crippling stomach aches, feeling like a massive loser. And then I talk about the conference and how much I loved it and how I learned about psychology and I knew I wanted to study. And then I say, but when it got to lunch or dinner, the idea of walking up to someone and saying, I don't have any friends was so terrifying that I just didn't have any dinner. Someone might be listening and someone might be like, you sound like a loser. I don't want to be friends with you. That's cool. I don't want to network with that person. I don't want to have them as a client or a boss. Whereas if someone's listening and they're like, oh, I went through that experience too, then it brings us that little bit closer. Another thing that you might want to tell stories about are the problems that you solve. And so it could be, if you've had that problem and you having a description of understanding what it's like to have that problem, but then briefly talking about how you got out of it. Or you can talk about a problem that like a former client has had, and you can change the demographics and the details so that they won't find themselves recognizable, but you keep the emotional truth the same. And so it might be like, I had a client and in all their marketing, they found that they weren't catching the eyes of people. And then, they decided to bring in some animation and some motion design. And then suddenly they were getting more likes on Facebook than they'd ever had before. So it's telling those little stories. But again, if you can put emotion in there, that's what's going to make us care.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I think, obviously you could do little case studies on your website and you could ask the clients if it's okay to like say what the brief was and what the issues were and like how you solved that and stuff like that, as long as you get their permission.
Yeah, totally.
I think that would be okay.
And I think most people, unless they're like, we're going bankrupt, most people aren't going to say, no, please don't promote my company anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So do you think that it kind of makes sense to tell clients stories about ourselves? Do you think that it will make them like us more?
I think it depends on the context. I mean, I generally think that stories are always good because we're just humans and we have like a human need for story, and it's how we pass down information, not just before the internet, but before books, was through telling stories. It's how we calmed ourselves down around the campfire. So I do think that there's like a humanness to stories that always works, but you also want to think about your audience and even in the ways that you tell stories. So for me, sometimes I'm speaking at a conference and it's like a bunch of personal development people and I can like get really real and like touchy-feely and vulnerable. And sometimes I'm speaking to a room full of like mostly white, middle-aged, straight, non-disabled, cis men, executives, and like I might not use some of that language or tell some of those more personal stories. They might be like, this is a bit weird. But I still will always include emotion, because emotion is the way that you can connect to any story. You might not have had every experience, but you have had almost every emotion. But also emotion builds tension. If you say, I'm sitting in the car outside my sister's house, then I might be like, cool. But if you say I'm sitting in the car outside my sister's house and I'm terrified, straight away I'm like, ooh. Or even I'm sitting in the car outside my sister's house and I'm so excited. Straight away I'm like, wait, why? And you've created an information gap, which is a thing we hate as humans. We always want to fill an information gap. It's why those BuzzFeed, you'll never believe number 6 headlines work. It's why when you have to be up in the morning, but Netflix is counting down 5, 4, you're like, I'm just going to watch till the credits on the next one. And it's because we hate an information gap. And so by giving emotion, but not yet closing the loop of telling us why you have that emotion, what's the scene? How did you feel? That information gap, it creates tension, because suddenly we like want to have that tension resolved of the not knowing, and tension makes our brains flood with dopamine, which is happiness, but also oxytocin, bonding and trust. And if you want people to hire you, you want them to trust you. And it creates transference, which is the thing where you feel like the story is happening to you. So having emotion does so many amazing things in your stories. And I feel like that's the biggest mistake people make, is they leave out emotion.
Yeah, I think where this could work quite well is on Instagram stories. Because like as motion designers, I've seen a lot of people recently like using the kind of feed as their sort of portfolio. So they only really post their work and stuff like that. But then using the Instagram stories section of it, because obviously it like goes away quite quickly, is like to include more personal things about themselves and their life, and like, flipping the camera around on them and like talking about their day and what things are good and what things have gone wrong and stuff like that. And I feel like that's quite powerful, because it makes you feel like, oh, there's like a person behind the work,
Yeah.
instead of just like a faceless
Yeah,
thing,
and you don't have to put everything. I often meet people who read my blogs or who follow me on social media and who they'll say, I feel like I already know you. But I'm actually weirdly personal about the facts of my life on those things just because I'm freaked out by data protection laws and anti-terrorism laws. And I'm somewhat of an activist. And this was even before all the Facebook stuff happened last year. I was freaked out. I have like a little cover on my computer where I shut away the camera. And so I don't talk about lots of the facts of my life. I'm very careful, not to kind of be too clear about even like where I live and stuff, and also just having worked in radio and having had some stalky situations. But I'm always telling little stories about little moments. And if I'm telling a vulnerable story, I make sure that I have emotional distance from it because your audience has to feel safe.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any other tips on like how we can use storytelling to, help us connect with more people and get more work and things like that?
I think don't be afraid of like a theoretical story. Even when somebody's saying what do you do? And one of the things on your secret webpage is it's 20 minutes, but it's actually just 15 minutes because the last 5 minutes is me selling a service I don't do anymore. But it's like a 15-minute class on how to answer the question, what do you do? And one of the answers is like tell a little story. And so rather than saying I'm a motion designer, which isn't what you do, it's your job title, like do is a verb. So you could say there was someone who had a website and, they wanted it to be engaging, but they didn't want to have like weird, flashy GIFs all over it. What I would do is I'd come in and I would, this is me kind of giving a good answer for what a motion designer does. But you know what I mean? So I would come in and I would do X, Y, Z, and then this would happen for the client. And so it's thinking about like, what's the problem that they have? What do you come in and do? And then where are they afterwards? So you can tell the story in that way so that a potential client could be like, oh, I'm a bit like the person in Hayley's story and I want to be like the end person in Hayley's story. So I'm going to hire Hayley.
Yeah, that makes sense because you're identifying the client's problem and then you're sort of telling them a story about that, which makes you seem like a human, but also lets them know that you know what their problem is.
And it like makes them imagine themselves as somebody who hires you and imagine themselves in that lovely, delightful place when that problem is solved.
Yeah, that makes loads of sense. I think that's like really, really awesome.
And you can even tell that story in the second person. You can say, okay, so say you were a company, blah, 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 and you did this, I would come in and then you would do this. And they're like, well, I am a person in that company. And I do want to be in that other place.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think it would help as well as like if you know the people that you're targeting and you know what their problems are and things like that.
Yes.
But that's like a whole
You've got whole other Motion Hatch episodes all about that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's been great to chat to you. Where can people find you and what you do?
Go to the special secret webpage, which is Marsha, marsha.com/motion hatch.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for giving us all those resources. I think it's going to be really helpful for everyone.
That was super fun. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you again to Marsha for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. It was super great to hear all her networking tips, and she's got some awesome resources for you all at yesmarsha.com/motion hatch. So do check that out. We'll also have the show notes at motionhatch.com. Thank you so much for listening to the end. If this podcast helps you, please do leave us a rating and review and subscribe to the show. We've got some great episodes coming up for you, so watch out for those. Have a great week. See ya.